It's wonderful to be here, and I am so excited to dive into the conversation that we're going to have today with all of our extraordinary panelists, and I have no doubt that we will all be inspired together. This is our second presentation of the Smithsonian's Our Shared Future, Reckoning with Our Racial Past initiative, which has been sponsored by Bank of America. And I will in a moment talk a little bit about our extraordinary partners in this endeavor. But before I begin, I do feel that it's important for us to just acknowledge the land that we're on. And for us at JANM, it's always important that we recognize that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, the Kizh, and the Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. Recognizing that a land acknowledgement is only a first step, we know that we must take tangible action to support Indigenous communities today and move forward toward meaningful solidarity with the original caretakers of this land. We encourage all of you, our visitors, our staff, and our partners to commit to supporting Indigenous-led organizations advocating for land and environmental justice, centering Indigenous voices, practicing reciprocity, and continuing to learn and grow our relationships with Native peoples and local tribal governments. So when we hosted our first national convening on race in December 2023, I think that we established a very strong foundation around the intersection of race, the issues of wealth, the issues of health, and the issues of the arts. And when we first started planning this event, we thought that we'd be able to pick up the conversation where we left. But of course, the extraordinary events of the last 3 months have made us reimagine what this conversation should be and what this conversation could be. And I'm just going to pause for a moment here and sort of go slightly off script because that's what I do. It's important that we acknowledge the context that we find ourselves in. You know, I was looking on the screen and listening to the narration of the remarks of Senator Daniel Inouye and how incredibly important it was to protect the diversity of America, to protect the diversity of race, ethnicity, and culture. And I think of where we are now, and I think of how there is this imprint, this foisting of a new ideology. And I think of what our role is as a museum in standing up. You will all, if you don't know, the Smithsonian, Trump issued an executive order yesterday restricting the Smithsonian. And it was to ensure that improper ideology is removed. And listen to the title of the ideology was Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, which is an extraordinary, I'm not even going to comment on it. But what I will say is that we had the privilege of having Secretary Lonnie Bunch at JANM just 2 weeks ago. And he spoke about, in this context, he spoke about the incredible importance of the role of museums, not just as history museums, not just as safeguarding history and truth, but as critical functions, as a critical focus and in protecting and holding that civic space together. And we've seen over the last 3 months what the attacks are on the civic space, how that is shrinking, the attacks on settled law, the attacks on race, the attacks on diversity. It literally goes on and on and on. And as you will have seen in that video, it's no accident that JANM was founded on this very place where Japanese Americans were forced to line up to board the buses that would take them onto America's concentration camps. We consider this as being one of those ground zero points in the civil rights history of this country. Well, the truth is now that every single diverse community, every single every aspect of diversity in this country, wherever there is a holdout, wherever there is a light, and we know that the resistance is growing, every single one of those points has become a ground zero point once again in the civil rights history of this country. As you go out, I don't know if you picked them up when you came in, but as you go out, I would invite you to pick up and take a look at the statement that JANM's Board of Trustees issued on the 11th of February. And I believe we've researched this, but I believe that we are probably one of the only museums in the country that's come out with an incredibly strong statement. And we deliberately called it the Statement by the Board of Trustees on the Defense of History, Democracy, and Civil Rights. And the reason our trustees did this, because at JANM we feel an incredible obligation to the history of Japanese American families, to the history of what they endured. There's an obligation to history, but there's also an obligation to use the lessons of history to shine a light on the present. And we have to be true to our mission. And the trustees felt that we can't remain silent while these policies attempt to strip people of their humanity and dignity and reverse the course on our nation's journey towards a more just and equitable future. And then the last paragraph I want to read in its entirety before I continue with my remarks, because I think it's important. We reaffirm our founding purpose to tell our stories, to stand up for the truth about history, to serve as a bridge across communities and divides, to stand against discrimination and hate, and to ensure that no community is ever again subjected to the injustices that Japanese Americans faced. In so doing, we honor our past and fulfill our responsibility today and into the future. So our conversation today is really in that spirit, and it's about fulfilling our obligations to the past, our obligations to the present, but importantly, it's about fulfilling our obligations to the future. And certainly our conversation that we're going to have today is going to be a discussion that's going to examine some of those contemporary forces that we're finding ourselves, that are shaping our current reality. In particular, we're going to look at how they affect our youth, because we have an obligation to the future. We always have an obligation to the future. How do we help them survive and thrive in a future that they want to create, in a future that now looks so bleak, and in a future that every single one of us have an obligation to push for, to push against, to create a future that is more just for everybody. We'll hear from people on the ground working with youth, as well as the role of philanthropy, the role that philanthropy plays in these efforts. And also we know that this is coming on the heels of the devastating wildfires that have decimated communities in Los Angeles. All of us at JANM were deeply affected by this. We had, like everybody else in this room, we had volunteers, we had members of the Japanese American, of the JANM family who lost homes. We had volunteers and staff who were displaced. All of us know people, all of us have been deeply affected. We know that our city has changed. LA will reinvent itself, because that's what we do. We will rebuild, but it's never going to be the same. How do we rebuild in a way that we center the community voices in that? So, our hearts continue to go out to everybody in Los Angeles that's been affected by this. And later this morning, I'm just so delighted to be able to let you all know that we'll welcome our keynote speaker and academic researcher, Anna Kennedy Borissow from the University of Melbourne in Australia. She'll bring her deep experience at the intersection of creative practice and disaster recovery in Australia and help us think about how we delve into those models and how we can adapt them for recovery in Los Angeles. And then after her keynote, she'll be joined by a stellar array of experts from the community for a conversation that's rooted in the arts, in culture, and community. And I also want to acknowledge our extraordinary partners who've once again joined us in this important work. La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. I'm not a Spanish speaker, I'm so sorry. I try, but my South African My South African accent gets in the way of that. Chinese American Museum. And we're just so thrilled to be celebrating today, to be having this conversation with them, and to being able to plan this together. And a special thank you to our incredible friends at the Smithsonian, who've recognized that we need to address how important these issues are, and who've been so extraordinarily supportive of our efforts. And JANM is a very, very proud Smithsonian affiliate. So for us to be able to partner with them is an enormous honor. For us to be able to give back to the Smithsonian family is an enormous honor. And I think also because of the courage of our trustees, we're also able to hold a space for other museums and other communities who don't have the luxury to be able to speak out and speak up in the way that we have. So now, let's launch into our discussion. I am so delighted to be able to welcome Dr. Deborah Mack, who has been such an extraordinarily powerful influence for us at JANM within the museums, within the museum communities. She's the director of Our Shared Future, Reckoning with Our Racial Past. She's also the Associate Director for Strategic Partnership at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. She's an extraordinary museum leader in the field, and she was also one of the guiding influences, one of the forces of nature behind the Museum of African American History and Culture. She brings such an extraordinary collaborative spirit, a generosity of heart, her access to public spaces, the way she brings us all in, the way that she educates, and just her expansive acknowledgement of the multitude of peoples and culture that have shaped the world today. So it's such a privilege for me to bring one of the people that inspires me most in the museum field, Dr. Deborah Mack.
Good morning again, everyone. Because you have an array of incredible speakers, supporters, stakeholders here, and I want to particularly thank all of you for being here in person and participating, because the realities of the work that we do, that our institutions do, is only as much as effective as much as you are the contributors and the shapers of that. We are very proud and very delighted to be invited back again to participate with JANM. Some of us are very mature museum professionals, and I've been noting JANM, and actually have participated with earlier, from the very beginning of JANM's development, from several generations ago, shall I say. I was just remarking earlier to several colleagues that JANM has historically, as you see now, been in the forefront of understanding what a community of practice is, understanding what it means to be an institutional and organizational leader, not only for the museum field, but for the communities and stakeholders it serves. It is a light in the national and international museum field. For those of you who are local and appreciate it, I would hope that you really explore more to understand the significance of JANM's recognition globally. It's quite profound. I was sharing with a younger colleague today that as much as I knew about JANM, it was September 11th that, in a sense, where JANM became the standard bearer for what museums should do, can do, and how they do. If you're not aware of that, when September 11th happened and there were local immigrant communities here that were under threat, it was the JANM staff who went out in the streets and protected neighborhoods, protected individuals, because I remember, as they said, we know what that's like. We've experienced this. That was not that long ago in many ways, but JANM has, from its founding and through now, as you can see from these remarks led by our director, it continues to be steadfast in that kind of work. That work is also very local, and what we appreciate about JANM and what we try to share about JANM's organizational practice with other museums is that it listens to its community needs. It does not dictate what individuals or organizations should do. It partners, it collaborates, it is respectful, it is multiracial, it is multicultural, it is multilingual, it's very respective of the American, and I'd say global communities that it works with and that it represents. I am going to really just comment very briefly on the Smithsonian status, as has been referenced. The White House issued executive orders only yesterday about Smithsonian. Our Office of General Counsel, led by Secretary Bunch and our Deputy Secretary Maroy Park, are working with our legal counsel to determine what the response should be, but we are not doing anything differently than what we do now, and there is no intention of changing our course of work. Our work for the Reckoning with Our Racial Past initiative is to support and amplify the work that organizations like JANM, like the Chinese American Museum, like Le Plaza, do. You should know, here in Los Angeles, these were the first institutions we reached out to launch our national work, because they're such exemplary models, not only in what they do and how they do it, but in collaborating with each other. That's extremely important, and we share what you do, what happens here across the nation with others and actually beyond. So our next major program is, in fact, in Panama, about race, and it's multilingual. Oh, the primary language will not be English. Gee. But we stand in admiration and support of what you do. We are learning and listening at the same time, and we're trying to share as broadly as possible the work that happens here. And we thank you all for being here, and I very much look forward to hearing from our additional speakers. Thank you all.
Hello, friends, old and new. If you haven't met me yet, I just want to let you know that since I started at CAM in 2005, I've always been a tad bit difficult. It's always been a tad bit difficult to make small talk. So unsurprisingly, coming from a museum, when I find myself in random networking situations, I will often start off with the usual icebreaker. Have you been to the Chinese American Museum? The response, more often than not, is enthusiastic yes. And if you're thinking, that's great, that we're excited for us, thank you, but know this, I also get excited for us. And right before I follow up with the usual, what exhibition did you recall seeing? They will follow up with that they had just visited Little Tokyo with their friends, our family, and they really loved the museum. And I will awkwardly tell them that they had just visited the Japanese American National Museum, and that we are 4 blocks away, located across the street from Union Station, at a Pueblo, alongside our friends from La Plaza. And you ever wonder, Anne, if JANM is loved? I have years of testimony from random people telling me that it is. But I also want to thank you and JANM for having me here today in this space. But now I have a new dilemma. In the future, if anyone ever tells me that they heard about the Chinese American Museum while they were in Little Tokyo, I now have to pause and think. If they're actually here today, or should I respond with my usual follow-up? That's okay. That's okay for the mix-up. That it happens more than often than not. And if they're ever in downtown to come to the Chinese American Museum and have to do a little plug, we're open every Tuesdays through Sundays, closed on Mondays, and we are free to the public. It's okay. I'm standing here today mouthing the words, it's okay. But is it? I ask all of you, is it okay? Should I be okay to accept that an institution that shares the experience of Chinese American is often mistaken for an organization dedicated to telling the Japanese American history? Should we be okay to accept this unintentional erasure of history, this deletion of our story, and this elimination of our existence? How do we create an appreciation for or develop a deeper interest for people to learn about our unique histories while also accepting that we can honor our identity as an Asian American, as a person of color, as an ally, and as an American? For those working in an ethnic-specific institution, especially in this moment, these moments of uncertainties that we now are forced to face, do we do the work and not confront? Do we encourage learning to teach without reflection and not confront? And we do confront, how do we risk the lives of our staff and our livelihood? I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Deborah Mack and her team through the Smithsonian Art Share Future Racial with Our Racial Past initiative as part of their National Conversation on Race series to encourage us, JANM, La Plaza, and CAM to cross the 1-1 freeway, to walk across Main Street, and to work together to seek answers, to problem solve, and to say it's not okay. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to take part in this initiative that accepts that we are capable of telling our stories with different lens and with different perspectives, where I know that our history, that the road, past and present, that we walk on or drive on, are in fact the same, and that these shared experiences is what truly unites us today and tomorrow. For Los Angeles, 2025 has already been a very long year. From the wildfires to the administration's actions that are imparting some of our most vulnerable communities, attacks on many of those in our communities. It is our young people that feels the impacts the most, but that also possess incredible resilience. Today's speaker will explore how they see youth being impacted and what is needed to support them, as well as ways to empower them going forward. It is now my pleasure to introduce Alex Johnson, who will lead this discussion. Alex is Vice President of Public Affairs at the California Awareness Foundation, where he oversees the department's government relations, community engagement, and strategic communication. Please give a warm welcome to Alex Johnson. Thank you so much.
I would be remiss if I did not thank the Democracy Center and the Japanese American National Museum for its leadership, its vision, and its commitment to ensuring that we are not shrinking from discussions around race, but rather that we are embracing them. As Ann stated, and I appreciated that this is ground zero for these discussions and these types of conversations. My gratitude to each and every one of you who are here today. I'm excited about the conversation that we are slated to have with a panel full of brilliant leaders and agents of change. But before we transition into that dialogue, I've been asked to offer a few words, not just to begin our time together, but to help anchor it, to root us in the truth of where we are, remind us of the history that brought us here, and call us into the urgency that must carry us forward. I'm not an expert by any means, but I'll admit to you, I've wrestled with what to say in this precarious moment that we find ourselves in. A moment that for some feels like uncharted territory, but for many of us, especially those whose communities have carried the weight of injustice for generations, this feels less like a rupture and more like a remix. 60 years ago, Dr. King wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait, he talked about this amid racial violence, economic inequality, policy gradualism, and government paralysis. And yet here we are again, banning books and attempts at erasure when we should be building futures, criminalization over care, stillness where there should be shouting, compliance where courage is required. Our shared history, the constant cry for justice and for freedom, the unfinished promises that shape what we call democracy, is calling out. Not as a whisper, but as a warning. Because history has such a jarring way of circling back, of shape-shifting, of wrapping oppression in new language and dusting off old policies, of rebranding freedom to pacify the needs of those whose freedom and humanity and dignity and worth have never been at question. We have been here before. It is clear, the cycle is clear. From slave camps to detention centers, from Native American boarding schools to foster care pipelines, from internment camps to family separations at the border, from segregated schools to chronically underfunded classrooms and the dismantling of our systems that serve the departments that educate us and grow us, from red line neighborhoods to zip code-based life expectancy, from plantation fields to prison cells, from false narratives of efficiency and accountability that are weaponized to excuse harm, and a government that has seemingly forgotten its basic purpose: to serve, protect, to care for all people with dignity. Now, these aren't disconnected events. These are coordinates on the same map of oppression and injustice, a map that traces the perpetual wounds of this nation's unhealed sins, wounds inflicted by anti-Blackness, nativism, jingoism, by classism, by unchecked economic inequality. The list goes on and on and on. This is the trauma of a nation in an abusive relationship with its own people, one that denies its past while demanding our patriotism. And layered on top of all of that is the myth of American exceptionalism, a narrative carefully constructed to quiet dissent, to dismiss suffering, and mask the betrayal beneath the promise. All of it feeds the rage we are seeing now, rage that is righteous and rooted, disruptive and resistant, querying and wearied. Rage passed down from generation to generation, not as abstraction, but as lived experience, as daily navigation. And yet, despite, or as some folks might say, through it all, our communities have not only survived, they've moved mountains. They've organized, they've reimagined what this world ought to be. It's a history not of perfection, but of persistence, a multiracial movement towards freedom built by those often on the outside of power, continuing to dare to believe that they belong at the center of it. And I feel this paradoxical divide between the aspirational words etched into our founding documents and the long unfinished hymn of history that tells a much different story. A story of a democracy slipping further and further away from its promises and potential, a democracy that continues to be stripped of fairness, of dignity, of wellness, of representation, of justice, of equity, of inclusion, and of love. And yet I'm reminded of Dr. King's wisdom that disappointment may be finite, but hope remains infinite. Disappointment may be finite, but hope remains infinite. And if hope is to remain infinite, then it cannot be passive. It must be carried forth in people, in movements, in the ones who have the most at stake and the clearest vision of what's possible. It means investing and resourcing the work to ensure that a mother won't have to bury her child because gun violence prevention is treated as a public health epidemic. It means supporting the dignity and well-being of workers, those who labor exhausted and unseen, yet push forward to put a roof over their head, clothes on their back, and food on the table. It's about ensuring that families will not be forced to choose between rent or health care, that health care is treated as a human right, and that people will have the access they need, not the rhetoric and misinformation that causes lives to hang in the balance. It's about ensuring that communities torn apart by wildfires will not be left to fend for themselves in the aftermath of a climate disaster because investments in an equitable recovery never reach them on time. And it's about reversing the disparities that many communities have persistently faced, bearing the brunt of over-policing, of mass incarcerations, of systemic disinvestments, treating racial justice not simply as aspirational, but as a moral imperative. Ultimately, that means not turning away from this difficult moment, but turning towards it. You can attempt to erase structures, remove words, dismantle institutions, seek to cause great harm, but you cannot erase people. You cannot remove communities. You cannot dismantle the power of people yearning for a better tomorrow. The burden of refusing to concede is on all of us, but it's often young people, youth, leaders who are carrying that refusal with the most conviction. Not just navigating the weight of this time, but confronting it, naming it, and pushing the rest of us to keep going. And if we are serious about building anew what has been broken, then we must start by asking ourselves the following. What does it mean to truly support this generation, not just in rhetoric, but in real and in structural and systemic and sustained ways? And what does it mean to loosen our grip on power so that we can make room for possibility? Stop clinging to control and start focusing on transformation. When people ask me the question, how do we support young people right now? My answer is clear. We listen, we trust, we act with urgency and not caution, and we get out of the way and make room and space for those coming behind. Because supporting young people isn't about giving them our answers or yielding to paternalistic instincts. It's about making space for their questions, their vision, and their voice. It means recognizing that wisdom endures across generations. And our responsibility is to create space for new wisdom to emerge, not to hinder it or reshape it in our own image. Leadership won't always look familiar, and it should not. So we should be asking ourselves, are we being gatekeepers or co-conspirators in the pursuit of justice? Are we asking young people to navigate systems built to exclude them? Or are we sharing real power in how those systems are redesigned? Are we dispensing with performative engagement and funding youth-led movements, ideas, and organizing at scale and with trust? Are we playing it safe? Or are we actually catalyzing the disruptors, funding the freedom fighters, and challenging the supplicants and status quo? Support can't just be symbolic, it must be structural. At the risk of full disclosure, I'll be 45 in a few months, and so I say this not as the voice of a young person, but as an ally, as an amplifier, and as a committed accomplice. I say this not just as someone who works in this space, but as a parent to a child who already sees the world more clearly than I sometimes want to admit. My 6-year-old daughter knows that unfairness exists. I hear it in her very direct questions. I see it in the quiet way that she observes the world around her, and her clear and demanding sense that things ought to be kinder, fairer, more just. And so I am moved, radicalized even, by her and by our 4-year-old son to do my part, however small, to help build a future worthy of them and of those still to come, to help build a pathway so that the defiant hope and radical imagination of young people, youth, and their allies can thrive. So where does that leave us? It leaves us standing at a crossroads, accountable to the truth that history teaches us while organizing and advocating for a better future. Young people are simply not waiting patiently, they are building urgently. They are reimagining, not with permission, but with protest and with power. We are bearing witness to the last gasp of a reactionary movement, born out of the vestiges of colonization and segregation, exploited and manufactured to sow fear of all of us in this room of a multiracial, inevitable democracy. So many of us in and out of these spaces exist in the comfort of our privilege and self-preservation while folks are sacrificing their bodies, their livelihood, and living in fear. And so we who believe in freedom cannot simply yield to deodorized and dainty discourse, preemptive positioning, and soliloquies of submission. We must be fervent truth tellers, allies in solidarity confronting the gale force winds of mendacity, witness bearers in a moment where the fragility of our democracy hangs in the balance. Contrived commitment is not a course correction for complicity. And so I'll close with this as we transition to this panel of leaders. Music has always been the voice of movement, the symphony of struggle, a powerful weaving of poetry and melody, rhythm, and resistance, sound, and spirit. Mavis Staples, Nina Simone, Sam Cooke, the list goes on and on. Their voices didn't just accompany the movement, they moved it. They sang what was unspeakable. They gave us something to hold on to when the world was unsteady. And that tradition continues in new voices, in new rhythms, through art and activism and storytelling. And so in it, I hear the echoes of the poet Kendrick Lamar, whose boldness, whose brilliance, whose urgency calls us into action. He says, we're gonna be all right. Not just simply a lyric, but a declaration. We are going to be all right. This promise of survival and resistance, of defiance and hope. So we listen to young people who are the architects of this future that's already upon us. We fund those on the front lines who are organizing and agitating. We break our collective silence and paralysis and lift our voices. We stand firm in our unflinching boldness. And we fight for the dignity and worth of every person. Whether they were born here or elsewhere. No matter a zip code, no matter a gender identity, no matter an immigration status, no matter an ability or who they love, because basic humanity should not be a negotiation subject to an executive order. At the end of the day, we cannot simply be a witness to the fight for justice. We must heed the call to do the work, to stand in solidarity in whatever way we can, to be in the fight unapologetically, boldly, unsatisfied with satisfactory, pressing forward with hope coupled with action. Thank you. I am just simply delighted to welcome some dynamic leaders to this stage. You have their full bios in your program, but what matters most about them, the through line for each of them, who I've gotten to read about and learn about and know in many different ways, is that they are foot soldiers in the fight for justice. They bring a unique perspective, weave through a range of experiences to this conversation. And so won't you join me in welcoming Mario Fedelin, CEO of Changeist. Mario, give him a round of applause. Cielo Castro, Chief Officer of Policy and Programs at the California Community Foundation. And give a huge round of applause to Herr, Director of the Democracy Center. We're focusing this time we have today around young people and their future and their democracy and our role in it. Talking about their agency, their clarity, and their urgency. And so, to this panel, each of you are practitioners or policy shapers or change makers. You're walking alongside young people in many different ways, supporting their ability to navigate this critical moment. And so, a soft question to get you in the flow, soft question. As leaders who are accountable to a generation that's simply demanding more courage, and more conviction, more truth than ever before, how are you holding space in this moment? How is this moment resonating with you as leaders who've been charged to act and to support young people? And let's start with Mario.
Well, first, Alex, thank you for your words. I feel like we could just wrap this up, go home. You know, I will say that it has been in this time where I feel sometimes paralyzed with fear, despair. I have an 8-year-old in my family, and just like feeling everything, and then looking around and be like, who's the adult that's going to solve this? And then realizing that that's us. That's us. And that freaks me out a little bit, if I'm not being too honest. Because we have hundreds of young people that come into our space each week, and they are full of energy, feeling a lot of the same things that we're feeling, and recognizing that, I now have power. And how do we share it with them, I think, is the question. Is that me and my peers have to really grapple with. Is like, how do we actually do this?
Cielo, same question. How are you holding space in this moment?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question, Alex. And, we were chatting before coming up here and talking about my 8-year-olds, I have 2 of them, and how we're showing up in this space, all the things that we all have to juggle every day as we navigate life, while we're navigating all of the uncertainty that we're facing as a country, and here, especially in Los Angeles County. I think the words that I shared with Mario is the words that I share with the team at CCF at least once a week, which is that there is nowhere I'd rather be right now doing this work than here and now. But man, is it a lot of work. And so I think for me, it really is grounding myself in the long arc of moral history, right? Like the long arc of justice, remembering that we've been as a country through so much worse, how we kind of grid ourselves up, right, to make sure that we brace ourselves for the impact and protect young people from having to bear so much of it themselves. I think that's what we're really called on to do in this moment. And that can feel heavy at times, but like I said, it for me, it's work worth doing, and keeping in mind, speaking with Ms. Mack behind the scenes, that we have been through tough times before, we will see tough times again, and the work continues for us. And so just keeping that reminder for myself that this is the work that we're called on to do right now. Very different than the work I thought we would be doing a year ago, certainly, but here we are, and we're doing it.
Jim, let me sort of put a little tweak on this question for you. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Cielo talked about this arc of history and of this democracy. You are sort of centered in the democracy center. And so you're seeing it, you're feeling it, you're talking about it, you're having these conversations on a regular basis. So what is that doing for you as a leader who's thinking about not just the here and now, but the future? Mm-hmm. How is that sitting with you right now in this sort of period of time?
Well, it's always a struggle in the morning, whether I turn on the news and see what horrible thing has come out overnight. It's very, very easy to get trapped into this feeling of despair of what's going to happen next. How do we address this? Where do we get the resources to do this work? But I'm glad that you talked about hope, because I think hope is so important, especially for our young people right now. If we're going to hold space, that's one of the spaces we need to hold for them, because we need to find moments of joy in this world today. And hope is what fertilizes and helps joy grow. And so I think if we continue to just focus on what is so hard to deal with and so heavy that the youth may not feel that they can step up the way we need them to. So JANM has always been this place that talks about the heavy history that happened right outside these doors. But it also talks about the resiliency of the Japanese American community, the wonderful cultures and cultural touchstones that they have shared with, that have made the American canon of art, truly unique. And so we stand as an institution that wants to invite youth in to celebrate what they can do, but we need to be able to give them the tools for the future. We can't just hope that they'll figure it out. And that's why that's the work that we do and want to do.
I want to stay there for a few moments. I mean, we talked about hope, I'll come back to another question on hope. But thank you so much. Oh, that's even better. All right. But young people's actions, their fervor, their righteous commitment in this moment feels like it's rooted in this unfiltered hope. And so, Mario, let me bring you back into the conversation. You're working with young people, 11 to 26 year olds. I don't know if I would have. Well, I would have considered myself still a young person, thinking about that. But what are you hearing from them around how they're feeling, how they are responding, and how they want us as leaders, as adults who have witnessed this arc of history in many ways? How do they want us to show up in this moment? So I'd love to hear what you're hearing from the front lines at Changeist.
It's a spread. Because I have the 26-year-olds, and we have the 11-year-olds, and we have the high school students, and everyone's sensibilities. My mic is kicking in and out, isn't it?
Put it a little closer.
Yeah, it's a little closer. There you go. I got the Britney Spears mic. All right, how about Jeff? You got me? Yeah. All right. Where was my train of thought? Oh, the spread of young people.
Yes.
So we have a spread. When it comes to our older folks, they are feeling it. They're the ones who voted. They're the ones who are watching the news, who are enthralled in TikTok, who are kind of creating narrative. And they're all then also working with some of our high school folks who are then, in our middle school folks. I think the part that's exciting for me is that sometimes we do have a slice of our middle school, the 11, 12, 13-year-olds that are aware that something's not right, but they're still choosing to dive into being kids, which is where we need them to stay for a little bit. If I had to choose, right? How do you keep that spark of joy alive and possibility for as long as you can before you start to get really tumbled in that dryer? Because once you start to hit the realities of entering high school or all these sorts of things just shift radically quick. And I'm not saying this is just kind of me generalizing, because I understand there's also 11-year-olds who are in the thick, who are scared, who are freaking out because their parents don't want to go to the grocery store, so they have to go to the grocery store to buy groceries because of their status of the family. That is very much reality. What I found to be some of the best strategy during this time is just holding space without prescription. Holding space without some sort of mastery or some sort of intervention, but how do you hold space for young people to come and be young, have fun, enjoy each other's company, have some older people who they enjoy company, talk about pop culture, talk about the Super Bowl halftime, whatever it is. Allow them to be in a space where they don't have to be so clouded with the reality of the world that is just really hard to navigate in this moment. And when they feel like it starts to bubble to the top, allow them time to say, F this, I hate this is hard. Give them the room to say whatever the hell they want. And then as the adults in the room, or the older person, I've aged out now. I'm officially adult. I've moved on from provisional adulthood. Do the thing that I think my parents struggled to do for me, which was tell me it's going to be okay, and allow them to believe me. Because we do have a little bit of history. You know, we understand that we've been here before, and then act in a way that shows them this is going to be okay because I got you. Right? And we're going to talk about these executive orders and stuff, and I can tell you how we're responding, but that's kind of how I've been seeing it. It's a spread. We want to maintain the delight and the joy, and that's the only way that we're all going to navigate out of this thing. That's my opinion.
Cielo, let me turn to you. Both you and Mario are parents, and how do you, as a parent and as a funder, so you're a funder, you know, who is supporting organizations on the ground. California Community Foundation is doing a lot of work across this region, and you're a parent. And so that duality of holding space in this moment and thinking about how do I respond at work and make sure that communities are getting what they need in this moment, and how do I, to Mario's point, sort of protect the innocence of my own children even while I'm navigating your personal feelings around what's happening. So how are you balancing that?
Oh, Alex, always the easy questions for me. I've known Alex for a long time, which is why we can have these conversations up here in front of all of you. So I mentioned I have twin 8-year-olds, a boy and a girl. And in November of 2016, I was pregnant. And I made a decision then my kids were born in December. I put my head in the sand for 2 years and focused on them. I was not at the California Community Foundation. I had the luxury of being in a job where I did not have to think about what was happening in DC. And that's what I did. And, you know, fast forward, now they're 8, they're in 2nd grade. Because their parents are so civically engaged, my children know when it's time to vote. And my children grew up here during when we were realigning our election calendar in the city. And so there was a period of time where we were voting often, and they know that we go vote. And they asked me why, after, like, in the lead up to this presidential election, we haven't voted in a long time, why haven't we voted? So my kids are already there. They're already aware of how important it is to vote, why we vote, why it matters, why their voice matters. They saw kind of my reaction over the summer, turn of events, over the summer with the Democratic Party, in the ramp up to the election, and now. And so holding space for them to feel what they feel is really important, and how to continue to help them to believe that we're going to be all right is hard. But I think what I hope I've shown them, especially in the last 3 months, is what it means to show up for community, and what it means to show up for your community. And so we live in Eagle Rock, Pasadena adjacent, and we received an evacuation warning. And so we packed up the kids and went to Norwalk, where I grew up, where my parents live. And as soon as I ate lunch, prepared by my mother, I opened up my laptop and worked 5 days straight. And they noted that. And it didn't faze my kids because they're used to me working. My parents didn't really understand why I was working on Saturday and Sunday. My kids were like, oh, she's just working, it's fine. She's on a conference call. They're like, oh, you have to be quiet, Mommy's on a call.
That's when mine ask for snacks. I'm hungry.
My kids know where the snacks are, so they're good. I've set it up that way for them. But, you know, on MLK Day, they were out doing service. with their dad while I was on conference calls, because it really mattered to us that they remembered they were born in Pasadena, so much of their little lives are based in Pasadena, and that for them to understand why I had been working so much for the prior 10 days. And 4 years ago, I took Inauguration Day off. We were geared up. Alex might have seen the picture of my son in his suit with his American flag lapel pin, because that's who he dressed up for Halloween that year. We didn't turn on the television on Inauguration Day this year. My kids were out in service to community in Pasadena. And so I think, we talk about it a lot at home. It's in our everyday. And they have to know that they and we are doing our part to continue to preserve the community that we care about, the community that we hold dear. And I guess the short answer would have been, showing by doing.
I love that. Cielo and I share a best friend. And so that's been our relationship for, almost 2 decades. Jim, we think about how folks are showing up at home, how folks are using their organizations to support young people. Democracy Center is about both remembrance and sort of revving us up for the future in many ways as I think about the work. And so how are you using the Democracy Center and all the work that it's doing to make sure that young people who are pushing us to be less cautious, to be less compromising, to exert more control over our destiny, how are you using this space to help to accelerate or to supercharge or to help mold the work that young people are thinking about?
Yeah, thank you. For the Democracy Center, we, from the very beginning when we kind of relaunched this, with the idea that we need to provide youth these opportunities, because if we, in all of our programming, can show them that they actually belong, that this is their country. It was so easy for me growing up to not have community around me where I grew up. I was a little bit older than you guys, but within my lifetime, my parents could not get married in my father's hometown. When we talk about race, it has been something that has been a part of my life, but had no understanding of it where I grew up. And so it was very easy to not be able to see myself in positions of power, in positions of influence, because I didn't see any of that. And so we have to give youth the opportunity to see themselves as part of this country, as part of the solutions that we need. And we can do that through so many different ways, through culture, through popular culture. And that's one of the best things about museums, is that we provide youth opportunities to see themselves, but also see others. Because if others don't see you as part of America, then you can never see yourself. And so we do this to educate young people from our educational program that we do here, that has tens of thousands of kids come through here each year to learn about what happened to Japanese Americans, but also to learn about what their responsibilities are. And for the Democracy Center, we're kind of keying in a bit on the semi-quincentennial.
Yes, I'm very excited. I'm very excited. Yes.
I feel like Don Quixote sometimes with this like semi-quincentennial.
I had to convince my wife that was a real word.
It's a real word.
Although somebody said the semi-Q, which I thought was like,
oh,
okay,
that's cute. Yeah.
Semi-Q, we could use that. But in the executive orders, there was an executive order on 250 that just has the same rhetoric as so many of the other executive orders. This idea of this celebration this co-opting of patriotism being just flag waving and parades and not really looking at history, but celebrating a moment in time that the rest of the country, really cannot connect to. I connected to it because I was living outside of Philadelphia, and that was the biggest thing during the bicentennial. And it's one of the few times I actually felt excited about America. And so we want kids, this is an opportunity, this moment in history, for young people to see themselves as American. We want to give them that opportunity, but we want them to also see that opportunity, see them in that history, see themselves in that history, but also see themselves in the future. So how can they begin to learn to take the steps? How can they map out the future for what they want to see this country do?
Joe, I want to stay with you. Oftentimes when we look at history, the pace of change is slow. It's incremental. Those of us who've worked in policy know that the arc of policy is often incremental, and there are moments where you can accelerate. Sometimes those are fortuitous, other times they're strategically planned. And so how do we reconcile this urgency that we are seeing among young people, like this need to, let's get this done. Like, why are we waiting so long? We've been dealing with this issue for decades and generations, with this pace of change that is part and parcel because of bureaucracy, because of the function of government. And if we look at the national landscape, we're seeing change, although not the change we necessarily want, happen in real time. So how do we reconcile that? And I'll bring in Cielo and Mario on that as well. But let me just start with you on that pace.
It's so hard, I think, in the world today because everything is so instant. I'm hungry, so I'm going to have something delivered, and it's at my door. You order something from Amazon, and it's there sometimes that afternoon. So the young people, and you guys can probably speak to this better as parents of young children today, like that expectation that what you want is going to be there right away is probably very, very difficult for them to reconcile this long arc. And so the only thing I can say is, like, let's not make it a long arc. Like, let's do what needs to be done to make change happen. And it's often, the long arc has to have a tipping point. There's got to be a point where something is just going to be like, it falls and everything falls into place after that rapidly. But we have to make it happen.
Mario, same question, but are we moving too slow?
Yes. But so here's the nuance, right? I think the hard part is in a world in which everything, and I think progressive and liberal folks want to make sure we don't live in binary. Social media and narratives become ultimately binary and less complicated, which then leads people to think solutions are binary and less complicated. And so this is where I feel like my role as someone in the space with young people is like, how do you make this a little more complicated so you can really think about people? Because people are complicated. And if you could complicate that picture just a little bit, it would shift the way they think and how they want to approach a problem. But when we say this or that, it makes it very easy for us to say, let's just do that, when, it's not that simple. And which then is the reason why we end up moving so slow. And then sometimes it's actually right. So again, I'm not saying that like we should be waiting to make it, we should be waiting and going with status quo on how long it takes for all this stuff to get done. But I do think that we really need to make room and space for nuance and complicated ideas so that more people are seen and more people come under the tent.
Appreciate that. And Cielo, I want to bring you in. You've had a long set of experiences in policy, working on policy in the philanthropic space. What are your reflections on this question of our pace as relates to young people and youth?
Yeah, I think in the last 3 months, I have really come to appreciate Mario's position. So I am a person of the system. I grew up in policy and politics. I have worked in government at the federal, county, and local level. I believe in the systems of our democracy. I believe that they're important. I believe that they need to be preserved. But what has happened in the last 2 months is unheard of and hard for me to reconcile, because I just can't imagine how quickly they're moving. And so I think it's really pushed me and it's really challenged me, and this is a conversation that we have among the team at the foundation. You'll hear from one of my colleagues later this morning about this, that, you know, I think one of the things I really appreciated about this moment is that young people are pushing us. They are challenging us. They are challenging everything about the status quo. And I think at this moment, that's what we need. And I think 3 months ago, I would have been reluctant to say that, because I believe in the pace of change. I believe in the rules. I'm a rule follower. You know, and so that has naturally been my approach to this world and to this work, that I have done the things I need to do to move things along in policy, in politics, in philanthropy now. And with an executive order, with the signing of a document that may or may not be legal, those things are getting undone, right? I worked at HUD on long-term disaster recovery, and I understand the pace at which government works, right? And I've been telling folks, like, it may take up to a year for federal funding from HUD to come to LA. And now we're planning where it may not. And so what do we need to plan for then if that funding doesn't come for any reason? And so those really difficult conversations, you know, have really made me question the pace at which I have allowed policy change to work, because, you know, I follow the rules and this is a process, and now I'm really questioning it. And so I actually really appreciate the conversations we had with young people in the lead up to the election and in the follow-up to the election. This demand for change, now I understand how quickly we do need to move.
You know, I'm a recovery lawyer.
Yes.
And been in recovery for the last 15, 16 years. And so there's this tension that I battle with between being a rule follower and a rule breaker.
Yeah.
You know, my 2 kids help to push me on that rule breaking side, because I'm trying to lead by example, the examples that they set in breaking rules. But when we think about this conversation around the pace, it gets us back to sort of how do we shape and shift our institutions. And so Jim and Cielo, you know, Cielo, you're currently in philanthropy. Jim, you spent a lot of time working in philanthropy. Not always the fastest field. You know, it's not running sprints as always, but it's gotten better. And so what might we be willing to risk? What norms should we be breaking inside our institutions to help accelerate the pace of change in service to this generation that is moving, again, with expediency and urgency to meet this moment?
Do you want me to go first?
Either one of us.
Okay. So yes, I spent many, many, many years in philanthropy, and we have a model for reacting quickly. When COVID broke out, philanthropy moved quickly to figure out what to do, to make the application processes easier, or even eliminate those kinds of processes. And so it can be done. There's just the will that needs to accompany it. And also just the recognition that, one of the things that I feel in my time in philanthropy was that I did a lot of harm in my pursuit of wanting to do good, because I put, these standards onto communities that were very rooted in sort of white capitalistic institutions.
Bureaucracy is moving slowly, but politics moves really quick. And so navigating that space now has been really fascinating in philanthropy. But I think the wildfire, I think the silver lining for me in all that devastation is how quickly at least the California Community Foundation really rallied. And the reason why I opened my laptop after that lunch and worked for 5 days straight is because we were able to raise a significant amount in our wildfire recovery fund and grant out $15 million in 10 days. So that's why, right? Like I recognize, like, I don't need to work through every weekend, but that's what I needed to do to make sure that money got to community as quickly as possible with as little boundaries as possible. So there was no applications, it was all general operating support. We reached out to as many people as we could to figure out who was on the ground and who was coming in to support. And we did it again 2 weeks later for another $15 million by February 14th. And so I know that we can do it. I think the challenge is, how do we get the systems to change with us? And so I think for me, it's been a really exciting time at the foundation, navigating kind of the transition from one generational leader to the next, how we think about the role of a community foundation. What does it mean to be in service to community? And so we spent actually the last 6 months of 2024 in listening sessions with community, about a dozen sessions over 6 months, to ask community, not about what I would ask them, which is, how do we preserve and how do we make LA the model multiracial democracy that we believe it can be? Because, that's a real conversation starter. So instead we asked, what does it mean to have a good life? What does it mean to have a good life in LA County? And what is the role of a community foundation in supporting that good life? And so grounding ourselves in what we've heard from community those 6 months, now reflecting on what that means for us in our work at this particular point in time. How do we best serve community? I think I'm really excited about where we're headed as a foundation, and I think the wildfire and how we came together to support community in that way that we did, I think gives you a preview of how we expect to engage going forward.
Was there anything that surprised you from those community listening sessions?
I think the through lines really surprised me, how we did them all over the county in all 8 of the service program areas, and virtual sessions, including sessions with young people. The through line of basic needs, that we are not doing enough as a place, as a society, to serve people's basic needs. This desire for economic opportunity and what that means for people, and what it means to be in a safe community. I was surprised by that, but I think it speaks to kind of where I am now in the world, right? That I don't have to question my safety like I did when I was a child, when my parents were undocumented, when I was answering the phone. So that continued need to provide safety, I think, is really important. And so how we think about it from the perspective of a community foundation is, I think, something we're really challenged with. But I think what surprised us was that all over the county and all of these listening sessions with people of all ages, that the themes were so common.
Mario, you're about to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, one, I attest that my microphone is not working. I think Jeff really just doesn't want me to speak. Jeff's up there. I'm just kidding, Jeff. Look, I will attest. Like CCF has been fantastic, right? I saw CCF give 4 amazing BIPOC women who are organizing Altadena the resources to continue to organize in their space, in their neighborhoods to get resources out. But what I also say during this time is I feel like you're an outlier. And I don't mean that to be cynical. It's just like, look, when these executive orders hit, it took me a day, and we're like, we're not gonna fuck around with this. We're done. This is like too cruel, too draconian. We're letting go all of our federal dollars, and we're gonna find a different way. And that's a 50% haircut in my little organization. But the moment we start to comply and contort is the moment that young people get a different service. They get a different community. They get me parsing through like, oh, should we take off this? How do we do this? And I've been in rooms with my colleagues who are so fearful that now Trump is in their boardroom. They're in their bathrooms. They're in the spaces with young people and how it all is doling out. That is actually happening. And when I come back to philanthropy, everyone, it seems like as I'm kind of, it's not everyone, I know we have a lot of philanthropists in this room, but like what I'm seeing is one, at a state level, our politicians are sitting on their hands. They're scared because they have to be able to bring this dollar in for the wildfires, right? When you have an administration that's threatening retribution or to not release dollars. Mm-hmm. And they're coming for our status next, the 501c3. Yep. And I don't want to be an alarmist, whatever, or a conspiracy theorist, but I can see that we know this is going to happen, which means that our philanthropists are waiting to see. But the longer you wait, the longer that money doesn't get to people to do something different. Mm-hmm. So I'm just a kid from the East Side who decided to make maybe a dumb $1 million choice in a second to do the right thing. We need philanthropy to get off their hands and deploy those resources so we could save this thing. Because if we don't, it's going to be too late and your status is going to go anyway, and that money's going to be sitting in someone's coffers, and people don't get what they need. We need courage. And it's been scary because so many people have been shirking up in this time. It is time. We are 8 weeks in, this thing's moving fast.
Courageous support.
Let's stay there. Let's stay there. I mean, because Mario, you're talking about really the real life impacts that are impacting young people who are feeling it. Their families are feeling it. Their communities are feeling it day in and day out. And so, yes, resources, money, etc. What else ought we be providing, giving, supporting? What is needed to make sure that folks are prepared and ready to engage for the long term?
Look, and you probably found this, the answer's already in the neighborhood, in our communities. People know what to do. We're resource constricted, right? And our institutions are being led by cowards who are opening the door for the federal government to come in and slow things down. And so we need, and again, I'm sorry for all my colleagues in the room, I'm not calling you a coward. I'm sure you're doing the best we can, because we are doing the best we can. So I'm speaking in hyperbole. We're doing the best we can. However, I've seen my colleagues who have now took away diversity training because the feds, they're worried about the clawback. We've seen statements get retracted on social media. And so in this time, the money is going to be helpful to open those doors, but we also need leadership in our institutions to say, like, this is not right. So how do I make sure this door stays shut so our community is safe? To allow the space, to allow our young people, to allow our communities to do the things that we know that is going to shore up community safety, right? So getting to school, so your parents don't have to drive you. How do you do carpools? Being able to have, immigration kind of like, workshops so people understand how to navigate family plans, how we're respecting and honoring people's gender identity in spaces so they don't feel like they're more isolated than they were even 8 weeks ago, and they're pretty damn isolated even 8 weeks ago. So how do you like actualize space and hold real space in institutions and not run from it? You just need to let that breathe, and that's a good start, at least. I don't have all the other answers, but like release the dollars and leaders lead.
So let's stay here for a bit. One, this is a safe space, and we are here to be truth tellers and to get into good trouble and to inspire others' attacks. So no apologies necessary whatsoever. And then Jim and Cielo, let's bring you in, because what Mario is lifting up is this tension, naming this tension around the ripple effects of inaction. And so the question becomes then, how do we use our power, our leverage points to push the folks who are in power, who may be standing in the way of unleashing support for young people? Does that make sense? What do we do? Like, what do we need to do? Not just you, but everyone in this room and those who are engaged in this conversation in other spaces.
Yeah, I think we need to invite them into the room with us. We had in November of last year, after the election, we had a gathering of state legislators on education policy and focus on dual enrollment. And we had a student who participated in one of the programs that we helped fund in the room. And she had prepared remarks, and she read those, and then she put her prepared remarks down, and she looked at me because I was facilitating. She said, "Can I say something else?" Please do. That's why you're here. And the fear and anxiety and that she was carrying, not just for her and her family, but for her friends and her classmates, about what was going to happen. And how could we be thinking, having this big policy discussion on dual enrollment and why it's important for high school kids to be able to take classes at their local community college or state college. How could we be having this very calm discussion while kids were having to navigate all of the things that we were just talking about, their identity, who their parents are, who they love, all of the things. And you could see the legislators just like, they were not ready for that. And so I think it's continuing to, be a bridge and bring those communities together. I think we carried on the meeting, we carried on with the policy discussion, but I think at the end, one of our assembly members said, we need to go back to the passion and conviction of this young woman who shared with us the real feelings that our young folks are experiencing, and carry that into the policymaking arena, because that's why we're here. That's why we got elected. That's why we're called to do this work. Like, let's not lose sight of that. And, yesterday we hosted a convening for one of our cohort of grantees initiative called Ready to Rise, which is focused on positive youth development. It's a public-private partnership with LA County, and so there's a lot of compliance involved, right? Because you're talking about government dollars and how the reporting needs to go. But given the moment, we chose not to lead that way, and so I'm proud to say that I heard that the convening was not just delightful, but effervescent in its delivery, because that's what was needed at the moment. We will have the webinars on compliance. We will have our compliance officer available for any technical assistance questions that come up. But really opening the door and creating space for people to feel what they're feeling at this moment, and think about how to channel that energy for change is, I think, where we're headed. And I think the next convening that we're having is on dual enrollment, where we're again inviting assembly members. And it's really, I think this is one of the roles that a community foundation can play as a convener, how we bring community together with policymakers to really advocate for the things that we care about. And we'll be doing it again in Sacramento in April on, I think it's called California Immigrant Action Day.
Yeah. Jim, let me switch up the question a bit.
After I already thought of it.
I'm sorry, but I'm getting the signal that we need to move a little bit quicker on time. And this is such an interesting conversation with the three of you. We hear this myth often, and it sort of ties to this conversation around what we need to push forward. But we hear this myth that young people, youth, are not really engaged as we want them to be in our democracy. I reject that, but I'm curious if, from your perspective, given the work that you're doing, the young people that are stepping through these doors on a regular basis, is it that it's not the access, but it's more that we are, as a society, rejecting and narrowing the ways that they can participate in democracy. So talk about how we might reconcile that sort of challenge, because we want young people to be engaged. We want to move out the way and give them space, but give us a sense of what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're observing in that space. So
I'll talk a little bit about Mario. We, for the past 2 years, have hosted Changeist's, what do you call it, the opening ceremony. And the first year, do you remember, we had like 200 kids in the Aratani Central Hall, exciting and cheering and so motivated. And then outside on our plaza, we had about 150 kids on bikes that were just like doing bike tricks off the walls of the historic building, and it's one of those moments that you just don't know what to do. And I kept thinking, like, this is just, it's such the dichotomy between all these kids in here and all those kids outside. And it would be easy to point fingers at those kids outside and say, they're nothing but delinquents. And I mean, I wish they wouldn't bounce their bikes off the historic building, but it might be a question of access. Like, how can we, because those kids could have easily been inside, but where are they getting the information that they can participate in these things? And so much of like the programs that happen on a very small scale, they look for these kids that are like the brightest and the best and the ones that are at the top of the class. Send me the kids that are the C class, the C plus students, who nobody thinks that they're going to be anything, because those are the ones that A, we need to get to, and B, actually have something to say, but nobody ever asks them a question because they just kind of write them off right away. That's why so much of the work that like the Arts for Incarcerated Youth programs do. I went to Nordhoff Juvenile Detention Facility a few years ago with an arts program, and we were in the part where the kids are actually kept in cells. They've been there for years, and we had them all in a circle, and we all started talking, and they were like amazing. They were so engaged, but they were kids because they also were like, when are we going to eat?
Where's the snacks?
But I think we just need to be asking them to participate because nobody asks them.
Yeah, I was the punk rock C student myself.
And look at you now.
And I was the one inside,
I just want to say something about social capital, right? Because I know you talked about letting people into the rooms. I am, mid-career. The reason I'm sitting in this seat was because very nice, very amazing, gracious, grateful, amazing white people let me in. I stayed because I was good enough. So how do we share, now that we have a seat at the table, more abundantly our social capital, right? The moment I got a phone call from Cielo, which is like, do you know anybody who's organizing in Altadena? A 22-year-old AmeriCorps member who was with me, lost everything. I was like, absolutely. And like, how do we get, for young ladies, $50,000 so they can continue their organizing, right? That is, how do we share quickly and abundantly the power that we have, because it's so fragile. It's so concentrated right now in different rooms that the moment anybody who gets the space, we need to share at this time so that we can move around the resources and allow the energy to be unlocked with our young people.
Well, people need to be spending their social capital, because the silence out there, in where are the protest songs besides Kendrick? Like, where are the people that were speaking up before? Like, I'm sorry, like, I know everybody, like, call your congressman. I've never called my congressman or my congresswoman, because I just don't think calling them actually does anything. You can disagree, but
it does something.
But call influencers, call the people that people, especially young people, look up to, because nobody is speaking out.
And I think that's where, like, when I say, like, I've been really challenged and I've been really pushed, because I am a person of the system who is a rule follower. I was the person inside, taking notes at the speaker while folks were outside on their skateboards. Is that I acknowledge that, I am aware of it, and I am very open to being told that is no longer the way to engage. Right? And I think that's what we need to be receptive to. I think I was really challenged a year ago in the lead up to the election. We met with a group of very young climate activists. Might have been, I don't think it was the Changeist folks, but it was kids as young as 12 and young adults 20 up to 25, climate activists, many of whom were, they were talking about all of the work that they're doing around climate and protests and organizing. And those of voting age were choosing not to vote. And it really struck me, because I was like, man, but that's like, in my mind, right, as the rule follower, that is the one thing that you can do to actually change things, right? And so I think it's shifting that mentality of mine, right, that voting is not the only thing that you can do, that calling your member of Congress is not the only thing that you can do, but let's talk about all of the things that you can do to organize in your community, to organize at your school, and we've seen that very clearly here on the freeways in LA earlier last month, in January. Let's remember that youth have a civic voice, and that we need to be open to their forms of expression. And I think that's really what I'm being called on and really being challenged to, and I'm really appreciating these days, because see what I was talking about earlier, that following the rules and following the process and being patient, this is not the time for that. So what does the time call for? What does this moment call for?
You just brought up an image that's seared in my memory. Maybe a month and a half ago, young people walked out of school downtown. Yep. And we were in a executive team meeting, and we all stood up, heard the chants, and just saw this beautiful sea of young people who had left school, who were engaged in nonviolent protest, and were standing up for their rights. And it was powerful. And our CEO, Richard, and the E-team were taking pictures and putting it up on our social media. I mean, we got caught up in the moment. It stopped us in our tracks, because here were young peoples who were sacrificing, making themselves visible, and putting themselves on the front line. And I firmly believe that, as it's always been, young people will help us find our way out of this moment. We've got a few brief moments. We have gone way over time in this conversation.
I'm
but
not
one or two
nervous at all.
questions. One or two questions from the audience, if there are any. I know we have a mic that will rove around, and then I'll ask this panel a closing question, and we'll wrap up. Yes.
Thank you for this conversation. I'm a little conflicted here. I wonder if the word race is slowing rather than increasing the pace of change. So when my first son was born, they wanted me to fill in the race box, right? So I checked the other and wrote human, and I gave it back to her. So she looked at me and gave me the paper back. It's like, no. And like, yes, he is human. So I wonder if focusing on the words ethnicity and heritage would increase the pace of progressive liberal democratic change. So my sons identify, and I identify as well today, as American with Mexican roots. They identify as American with Mexican, American, and Irish roots. I think this would highlight, these principles of multiculturalism and multilingualism much better than a simple race, seems to me.
I really appreciate that. Any quick reflections?
Y'all looking at me?
Yeah.
Easy question, but quick thoughts and
So
reactions.
I always checked other because they never had a box for mixed race. And I love the question. I love, how do we explore that? I would say I was made to feel like I couldn't be American because I wasn't white enough. I was literally told that. It wasn't until I came to Los Angeles and had a community around me that I felt empowered to claim that. And the fact that you and your kids claim that is what we all need to be doing. And all of our kids, whatever color they may be, whatever orientation they may be, they need to be able to claim that, and we have to give them the strength to do that.
I know we had 1, 2. I'll hold it at 2. Okay, 3. But I saw this young lady over here in the green.
Yeah.
I just have a question of those who are in the world of philanthropy. Is there any conversation going on about increasing the amount of money that goes into the pot? I mean, out of your single-digit contribution for the wealth holders who are part of that world? And are you a part of those conversations? Are you able to bring this kind of message at that level?
Yes and yes.
Yeah, same. I think we're in very active conversations on that right now. Yeah, and we're not the only ones, I think, and right now that's a national conversation.
Yeah. I'm going to have to limit it to 3, so I'm going to give this young lady the last question, and then our panelists, I think, may be around for a few minutes to continue the conversation.
Gosh, I have so much going on in my head, so I'll try to keep this succinct. So I'm a recovering executive director of a CBO based here in LA County. So I've been in rooms with a number of you and when I was an ED, enjoyed really valuable partnerships with both CCF and Cal Wellness. But I left because I was burnt out. Like so many executive directors were working on the ground, especially during the Trump administration and then COVID. And one of the thoughts that, one of the things I thought about then and I continue to think about now, especially, when I think about the South Asian community that I worked in, is how do we nurture the next generation of leaders to take up the mantles of leadership in these organizations when it's so difficult, both from, philanthropy, in direct services, you don't get enough to, really just even keep the lights on sometimes. And when the alternative is to be able to live a sustainable lifestyle and not kill yourself and make yourself sick. And this is particularly true for those of us with lived experience that don't come from, aren't independently wealthy, and come from immigrant families where we have to sort of there's a certain sense of responsibility that we have, right? Or we feel that we have. So again, kind of a bit of a rambling question, but really it is how do we nurture and get these young people to stay within the social impact space in the nonprofit sector and move up the pipeline and really, be in these positions of power in the coming decades when we need them the most.
Mario, let me ask you to give a quick response to that, and then we'll have to close out.
First, I would say pay them well and mentor them. It would be my simple distillation of, right? It's like, how do you make sure you create a nice little ladder for them and also allow them to be who they are and express that so that the next iteration of that institution will be in the likeness of something different, because that's what I'm grappling with right now is how do I learned from those very nice, amazing people that let me in those rooms. And so I'm trying to figure out how to switch it up to do more courageous, more bold things that I would have liked to see when I was a young person.
So we have to end there, but let me ask our panelists to respond to a closing question. So much of this work is soul clenching. It's tough. It's challenging. And so for all of you, one way in which in this moment you are feeding your soul, giving yourself joy, and finding a way to heal for all the vicarious trauma and everything that you are seeing each and every day. It's just one way, quick response at how you're doing that.
I enjoy the stillness when I have it, and I spend time with my family.
I wake up extra early in the morning to work out because it helps me, and I shed mom guilt, and that means that when I am with my kids, it is filled with as much joy as possible. And yesterday that meant picking them up from school at 2:34 and not at 5:55 when I usually do, not at 5:55 when I usually do, to take them to opening day with the Dodgers.
Ooh, nice mom.
Yeah.
I'm finding my way back into music. The problem is I can get so lost in it that hours and hours and hours go by. But for me, the real joy is my dog. She's new to my family, to me, and it's a lot to put on a 7-pound Chihuahua to be my shoulders, emotional support. But I look at that face and look at those eyes and see her little tail wagging, and you can't help but feel joy.
Well, Jim, I might have to give you my dog that I'm trying to give away. But in all seriousness, I find joy in taking long drives, listening to music with the family. Ladies and gentlemen, give a big round of applause for our panelists.
And can we also have another round of applause for Alex, because that opening was just fantastic.